All right. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Jin Ellington. I'm the Interim Executive Director for the Entrepreneurship Center here at Keenan Flagler. And I'm very, very excited today to have Shawna Lemon and Helen Gu join me in our innovation speaker event. The Entrepreneurship Center lately has shifted their focus a little bit in talking about entrepreneurship as it relates to innovation and emerging technologies. So this session in particular, we're excited about based on some of Helen's work and Shawna's work, and just thinking about entrepreneurship at large and all of the great innovative opportunities that are out there. And so a quick note on the format. We will do some introductions. I'll have some questions for our panelists. We'll have discussion. And then in the last 15 or 20 minutes or so, we will have our Q&A, which will be open to all of you. Please feel free to use the Q&A function to type in your questions as we go along, or when we get to the Q&A section, and we will make sure that we get to your questions. All right, so let's get started. In honor of Women's History Month, we wanted to feature women founders, female founders, support for women within the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So would love to start with Shawna and then Helen. Would you share a little bit about yourself? So introduce yourself and then tell us about your organization or company, and then the role that you play within the entrepreneurial ecosystem as a female founder or in support of female founders.
Thank you, Jen. I'm Shawna Lemon, and thank you for this opportunity to speak with everyone today. So I am, again, Shawna Lemon, and I am a patent attorney. My background is I have a PhD in biomedical pharmacology and a law degree from UNC Chapel Hill, go Hills. And so I combine those to support the ecosystem in terms of I am a co-founder of a women's only investment group, an angel fund of women who invest in women founders. I'm also an angel investor in another angel fund, as well as a member of 2 venture funds. Also, as I mentioned, I am a patent attorney. So I am a co-managing shareholder of Stanek, Lemon, Krause, and Meeks, which is an intellectual property law firm, and it's a majority woman-owned intellectual property law firm. So I have married my 2 interests to the ecosystem so that I support founders, all founders, with a particular focus on helping women founders through financial means, investment, as well as protecting their intellectual property.
Thank you, Shawna. That's fantastic, and love all the intersections that you have in supporting women at all stages. Helen, how about yourself?
Good afternoon, ladies. Very nice to actually get a chance to meet with all of you and chat about entrepreneurship. So myself, so I'm a faculty at NC State in computer science department. So I founded InsightFinder based on my research in NC State. And so InsightFinder is an AI ops product company. And so we basically develop AI technology to actually help the operators in the world to better maintain our digital infrastructure, right? So like since we are using Zoom now, if IT system went down and everybody will get impacted. So that's basically our mission, is to get the system more reliable and more efficient using AI technology. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you both for being here. So I'd love to dive a little bit into the question about what unique challenges do you see that female founders face in the development of their businesses? What are some of the things that you hope to support, or in Shawna's case, hope to support, but in Helen's case, what are some of the things that maybe you found challenging in sort of finding or starting your organization and company?
You want me to take it?
Yeah, you want to start?
Okay, so again, I wear 2 hats. So the first hat, again, I mentioned that I am a co-managing shareholder of a woman-owned intellectual property firm. So when we started that firm in 2019, I was actually tasked with finding our financing. And I remember, cold callings and, introducing myself, and been practicing patent law for over 20 years, extremely successful myself along with my 3 other colleagues. But each time I call, I'd hear, oh, it's going to be tough. Oh, you got to have this, you got to have that. Basically, I got to sign my name in blood, all these different things in order to secure a line of credit. And so honestly, I was very discouraged. It was very discouraging. So I spoke to my husband, who happens to be a CEO of a family-owned business, and he has a lot of relationships and knows people in the financial industry. And so I said, okay, this cold calling thing obviously isn't working. Do you have some people I can contact? So I contacted a couple of names that he'd given me. And, I went from, oh, it's going to be, so difficult, to being offered tickets to sporting events, to try to assist me. I mean, people were just falling all over themselves to assist me because I was able to reference my husband. And so that was a stark contrast, because I'm the same person with the same background, the same finances as when I cold called, but it was all of a sudden different when I, mentioned my husband's name. So that's one thing that I think, women find challenging in terms of, financing. Also, as a female investor, I've sat through pitches from females and males, and there's always one question. And that question is, how are you going to do this? And that question is posed to the male founder. How are you going to do this? Tell us, we're so excited. To the female founder, how are you going to do this? Just such doubt and skepticism. And so those are some of the challenges that I see as an investor when I see female founders, pitch. So those are my observations. So Helen, I'd love to hear what you have as an actual entrepreneur.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, first of all, I want to putting a positive spin, right? So like, Shawna mentioned a lot of challenges. Yes, that's exactly what we experience. I think it's a lot of time it's about the perception, right? And so it's funny, like how, like, human brain can be, very short memory and very biased. And so they make conclusions based on the very few samples they have, right? And if you go to entrepreneurship world, and when you pitch to investors, they will basically evaluate you, right? Especially as a founder, they will say whether you'll be successful. Now, how they evaluate you is to match you to some profile they already know, right? And the funny story is that, for a lot of female founders, we don't have previous profile, right? And there's a lot of more male founders they can actually match with. And for female founders, it's a lot of unknown, right? And the funny story for the investment, right? So they are supposed to call the venture investor, right? But they are very risk averse. They don't want to take a risk. And so that's basically I think it doesn't mean like they are biased toward the women. I think it's the how human basically make their conclusion, right? Now, on the positive side, I think is that there's a lot of support, coming from basically people who have shared a similar background with you. So then you just need to find them, right? So I'll just give some examples, right? So for example, like, my company funded, bootstrapped by National Science Foundation, right? And the National Science Foundation has a mission is to basically increase the diversity of the startup ecosystem, right? So they definitely recognize, women and, minority founders, they are having, more challenges to do fundraising. And so you will have a higher chance to get actually grant from National Science Foundation, right? So that's how I, I don't mean like, people will give you grants just because you are women, right? So it's more kind of like, I think, open-minded, and they will, rather than look at, you as a person, but they look at the work and the company you're trying to build. So that's one aspect. The other aspect, I think, is that, you will get a lot of support from female executives and female investors, right? And I can say, like, honestly, from whether the customer pitching or investor pitching, I always got like much warmer reaction from female investors and female executives. So it's definitely, we need a role model, but at the same time, I think we share the challenge. We know, okay, how hard it is, and so basically people will go off extra miles to help you. So the key thing is to reach out to actually establish your networks, right? So networks is extremely important for entrepreneurship, and so that's pretty much the most important thing. You and on the other hand, I think also, like, look at things in a positive way, in the sense that there's a lot of noise when you try to do fundraising, right? So don't let those noise discourage you, right? So just this is not necessarily for female founders, and for any like founders, like when you go out to pitch, and you will encounter 99% of people don't actually see the value, right? And this is basically for any successful companies, right? Like Facebook, Google, and so everybody, right? And so there's a lot of noise out there, and so I think, as women, I think sometimes we are more kind of like sensitive to the humans, like how people think about you, right? So I think I kind of like start to actually learn, but still, it's a hard thing, right? So you need to believe yourself, right? So get rid, like, ignore those noises, right? It's not about how they think about you. It's you are yourself, right? You if you believe in this idea, if you believe in this mission, and you should just do it, right? So get whatever support you can get and just do it. Yeah.
So let me double click on something that I heard you both really talk about, which is network, right? Shawna, you said it was very different when my husband made some introductions and I was able to utilize his network. Helen, I'm sort of hearing you also say build out your network. So maybe more specifically, how can we build out our networks? What are maybe some specific things that you would recommend our students and those of us who are burgeoning entrepreneurs? How can we build upon that?
So I can tell you, networking, I think, is the key to almost anything. So even as a lawyer, I think back to when I was in law school. I should have been networking then, because many of my classmates, they're now in positions, whether they're at other firms and can refer business, or they're in-house counsel and can refer business. And again, not that I just want to keep in touch with people so they can refer business, but that is how you develop your network. And so as students, it is never, ever too early to start making those connections and keeping and maintaining those connections. So just in your classes, I mean, you can start there. I also encourage you to join various organizations, student organizations that or student sections of various organizations. So for example, I put in the chat a link to the Angel Capital Association organization. That's a very good organization for learning. Now they have events. Now I don't know if they have student rates or student memberships, but if they don't have that, some other organizations do. I encourage you to join those types of organizations, and to not make superficial connections, but to make actual meaningful connections. So again, networking is key.
Yeah. So I think building networks, it takes time, right? So it's no longer basically, it's not, never basically a, one-time thing, right? So so you want to make it like your lifetime kind of part of your experience, right? So, and I think the key thing here is that you need to don't be shy to talk to people about your ideas, right? So I think the key thing, I think, for any entrepreneurship and for any things you want to really make it, name out of that, is that you need to focus. And a lot of people, I would say, like, they change directions all the time. They, sometimes they want to do this, want to do that. And I think, if you can pick something you like and really go deep and focus on that, keep pushing it, whether you become, just, in a big corporation or startup or anywhere, you'll be successful. And along the way, you want to actually make connection to those people who share the same passion with you. So that's actually the most important thing, right? So like Shawna was saying, it's not like some superficial connections, right? You say, okay, you link to someone on Facebook or something, like they will help you, right? Not necessarily, right? So the key thing is that you want to find someone who believes in your mission, and they will help you, right? Because they have the same passion, they have the same mission. So I think the most important thing is that you need to be clear about what you want to do, and along the way, you want to collect your allies, your friends, share the same passions, share the same mission, and naturally you will start to actually accumulating a network people, right? So basically, if that's a mission you're passionate about, and you will make, you will be more known in the field, and then more and more people will know you, and then basically you will leverage them, right? So it's kind of like, iterative process, right? So I think this is something like, you should treat it as kind of like, for whatever career path you want to take, you should do that. Yeah.
And to Helen's point, don't be shy, don't be afraid to talk about yourself and, and your business. And that's where the elevator pitch comes in. So it's not necessarily a quote sales pitch, but you need to have your message so that you can deliver that message when you're out meeting people for the first time, so that they know who you are, what you're passionate about and what you're doing.
Yeah. Just to share a funny story. I met a female executive in the women's room. And so basically, so this is a big bank. And so we saw each other, right? So you can imagine, like, in the tech industry, we are probably very few women out there. And so she asked me, what do you do? And I was elevator pitch her, like, 2 sentences. And she said, okay, let me introduce you to our CTO. So I was like, okay, that's the probably most efficient pitch, right? So I ever did. So get ready. That's exactly right. And take all the opportunities. Yeah.
And that's going to have an opportunity. You never know where they're going to come from. And very quickly, that reminds me, I was speaking with a good colleague of mine, and she recently had a board opportunity. She's been elected to a corporate board, and we may talk about that or not, but very few women on corporate boards. That happened as a result of an interaction she had 9 years ago. So a conversation and a meeting that she had with someone 9 years ago, she made such an impression that person followed her career, and then 9 years later, they were instrumental in seeing that she was placed on a corporate board.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I have a statistic here about from the SEC saying that only 11% of board seats are held by women. I mean, I think it's improved since previous years, but that's still a pretty low number by comparison. Well, speaking of elevator pitch, Helen, would you mind doing that 2-sentence or maybe a different elevator pitch? Tell us a little bit more about your company, InsightFinder. Describe to us exactly your services and give us some insight into the technology behind the platform.
Yeah, so InsightFinder is using AI technology to predict outages, right? So all we do is this crystal ball we hope to build. And so basically anybody in this world, if they can actually get early warning saying something goes wrong in my IT systems. So this is regarded as a holy grail in the IT system management. And so that's one of the challenges we have, is that, you know, when I pitched this, like they were saying, wow, this holy grail, how can you do that? I don't believe you. And so I said, okay, this is based on 15 years of research we've been doing, and, you know, Google already use it and purchase it. And so yeah, so it is a very hard problem, but very impactful, because if you have that prediction capability, you can prevent, and you can, you know, have a reliable IT systems, right? So very soon the IT systems will become life critical, right? Imagine in the hospital, your network went down, right? And imagine basically if you're doing kind of surgery, in the middle of surgery, you're doing kind of some digital, you know, camera, and the system crashes, right? And all those things basically will become life critical very soon. And so it is a very hard problem. And so a lot of people will benefit from there. And if we have that, so that's basically what we want to work on, is that, you know, impactful. And of course, like for deep tech, we want to work on something very challenging, right? So that basically means that it's hard to do, and you have the opportunity, right? Because otherwise, if it's an easy thing, and pretty much everybody already did that, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned Google, and I think I read somewhere that Dell is also a company that uses your product. You know, what was that experience like as a woman working with a large corporation? Was it an easy sell? Was it sort of easier once you crossed over a big hurdle, like getting a large, well-known company like Google on board? You know, how has that experience been?
Yeah, it's definitely not easy. And selling to this big corporation, Fortune 500 companies take a very long time, especially for a startup company. And you know, they will actually test you out like for a very long time before they can make a purchase order for you. But I think at the, you know, at that level, right? So once you have the basically the opportunity to show your product, everything is based on the product itself, right? So I don't feel like at that time there's a bias, like, you know, this is a women funded or, you know, male funded company. So I think as long as you are given the chance, right? And so after that, I think that everything is kind of like more kind of I think scientific, right? And so it's different from fundraising. I would say fundraising is a very strange process. I feel like the VC world needs a radical changes. I mean, this is like very you know, it's now like they are making a big prediction, right? And they are making prediction based on very few data points and very biased data points. And so, you know, so that's the challenge, I think. Yeah.
Well, Shawna, I'm going to switch it over to you and sort of ask you to do the same thing, do a quick elevator pitch about xElle Ventures. You know, I know that you also have your law firm, but love to dig a little bit more into the angel network that you help co-found.
Right. So again, xElle Ventures, women for women investors, women investors for women founders. And we focus on what we call the 3 M's. And that is the mentoring, marketing, and money for the female founders.
Can you explain a little bit more about that approach?
Sure. And I know that, again, so there are 3 M's, and you may be wondering, well, you know, are they all equally weighted? And actually, it depends on the entrepreneur and the entrepreneur's needs. Now, in most cases, yes, money is what they really need. That's what's needed most. But we have encountered some female entrepreneurs that were pretty well funded, but they needed mentoring, didn't know what to do next. And again, because again, look how many female founders there are out there. So, you know, there need to be mentoring. So we provide that mentoring, and then the marketing falls under kind of the networking category that we discussed, introducing other female founders to other resources. Now, those resources may or may not be other females. They're just resources that help the female founder get ahead.
Mm-hmm. If you feel comfortable talking about it, I'd love to hear a little bit about some of the women-owned startups that xElle has invested in, or maybe, if you can't talk specifically about anybody, maybe the larger trends about what you've seen over the course of the years.
Well, we are, first of all, xElle is not an equity play. That is, we don't take stock in anyone's company or ownership, but it's a model. So we do provide loans at relatively favorable interest rates, but more accessible for the founders, not based upon some of the stringent qualifications that most traditional financial institutions would require. So we finance, we don't have any specific requirements. So, anywhere from life sciences to tech to any type of thing. So some of the companies have been, for example, like a water cremation, there's chocolates, there's whiskey, there's medical devices, there are dog parks. We're also looking at something in the equine area. So across the board, we just want to help female entrepreneurs who have a business, who present a business case and can repay the loan. So that's what we're looking for.
Mm-hmm. But, I'm going to dig even deeper here. What is it about the ones that you just described? I mean, I'm sure you get plenty of interest from women who would like to be supported by xElle Ventures. The ones that you named specifically, how did they stand out? Was it just their passion? Was it, a combination of passion and a good business model and business case? Was it the pitch itself? Or, love for you to even double click a little bit further.
Absolutely. I would say a combination of all the above. Passion plays a lot, a huge role in it, but also what we would call coachability. So that is, are you willing to accept advice, to work with someone, as a receive, constructive criticism, and, and not necessarily accept it, because not everything, every type of advice that you receive is going to be good advice. But it's a matter of, okay, I'm listening, I've heard you, but here's why I think I should go a different route. And if that's credible, then fine. But if you're just adamant, nope, I don't want to do it, and it's not reasonable, then that's a problem. But what I found is that the women that we've invested in, they're extremely coachable. They're very passionate, and some were very savvy with respect to the finances, and some weren't as savvy, but they learned, and they were eager to learn and listen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Helen, I'm going to come back to you. And, we sort of talked a little bit about the deep tech. And as I mentioned in the intro about our new series and sort of the direction that the center is headed, we're very interested in looking at the deep tech and the emerging technologies that are having a really, increasing impact on companies at all levels. What kind of trends have you noticed within AI and machine learning? I think some of the technology that you use with InsightFinder over the course of the last few years, and where do you see sort of the direction or the future for these particular technologies?
So I would like to say, like, AI has been really hot, and it's a lot of it's a lot of buzzwords, and so that's good thing and bad thing, right? Good thing is that, yes, people will actually be interested in kind of like, trying to learn what you're doing. The challenge is that basically a lot of people saying the same thing. How do you stand out, right? So in terms of the deep tech, I think, right now, I would say like deep tech used to have trouble to get fundings because people feel like, you know, you need a lot of, you know, investment, you know, to actually bring the product to the market. So that's typical. The deep tech startup will bootstrap using some government fundings, right? So, so you know, like I said, I mean, like if you want to pursue some deep tech direction, and the probably, you know, the most important thing is technology, right? You have to have certain, you know, very unique technology now to have this edge. Whether you are the scientist yourself or you are in a business school, you want to find a partner, a technical partner who can actually work with you, right? So in terms of getting funding, I think, you know, there's a lot of government grants out there you can actually apply. And then, so there's also certain VC funds, they are dedicated to deep tech investment. So that's how I found some of our early investors. They go to those, you know, so we got an SF SBR grant. And then basically some investors, they went to the SBR grant summit, right? There's a conference organized by SF. So then, you know, at there, I met with some investors who wants to actually invest further in the deep tech companies. So I think in terms of the trend, and I still see a lot of doubt from the VC world. And they all think AI is trendy, AI is cool, but they don't necessarily want to invest in AI because they feel like, you know, it's a lot of you know, unknown there. And I think that this is still kind of infancy. I think we are at a very early stage of AI productization phase. Lots of opportunities, but you know, in order to get, you know, investors to have confidence in you, and so you need to have certain you know, unique angle, whether it's basically the specific use cases you have or basically the specific technology you have. And the other thing is for AI is that, you know, a lot of people don't actually realize, okay, AI is not about just one algorithm. It's not, you know, so everybody knows deep learning. And when you talk about it, also, you know, I'll do deep learning and apply deep learning to this, I'll apply deep learning to that. So the key thing here is that you need to start from use cases itself, right? So you want to say, okay, I want to solve this problem. And what is a challenge for solving that problem? And then you find the right technology to actually solve this problem, right? You either you find it or you invent it, right? So that's the right solution. It's not coming from technology, right? So this is, I think, for any startup company, right? So you don't start from technology and you find the use case. That's actually pretty hard. What you want is that you start from use cases, right? You start from a real world problem, and then you basically find the technology to solve that problem. So that's the key.
Mm-hmm. So another question that I would love to talk a little bit about is the additional challenge, I think, as female founders of work-life balance. You know, it's not outside of the realm of possibility that there are those that graduate college and immediately dive into the startup world, but many of us probably kind of get started a little bit later in our lives, and by that time we might have families and children. And any advice you would offer for those that are interested as a female to get started in the entrepreneurial world? What advice would you offer them about work-life balance?
Shawna, do you want to go first?
Oh boy, so work-life balance, huh? There is no balance. There are just times when, you know, it is what it is. And what I encourage you, you know, whether it's children or dogs or whatever it is you may have, which you hopefully you do have an outlet, okay, that you, or even it's just yourself, that you make time for yourself, but understand that there will be a significant time commitment. And so if you have a significant other, a partner, you know, that person will need to be on board with what you're doing, and you'll have to figure out how to make that work for the two of you. And you'll have to figure out how to make that work for the dog, how to make that work for the children, and anything else that you have going on, because there's just no way to get around it. It is extremely, extremely demanding. Helen, you want to add more to that?
Yeah, it is definitely the most time-consuming thing, and like if you want to do entrepreneurship, it's a lot of commitment, and you definitely need to get support from your spouse. And for myself, I think my experience is probably very similar to most of women. So I was actually 2 months pregnant when I started to actually do fundraising, and so I was actually you can imagine it didn't go well. I mean, when I started to do fundraising, and sometime like until like 6 months, I'm 6 months pregnant, and people will look at me think, are you crazy? And then I was I think it's a lot of work, right? So what I did is that I kind of like decided. So I think the most important thing, like I said, it's not about balancing, it's about the prioritization. Really, you need to know what's the most important thing, and you do that, right? And this prioritization needs to be constantly happening. And you should ask yourself, what's the most important thing to you, right? And so so I think that as long as you stick to that point, then you will have no regret, right? So and that's for sure, that's a lot of work. That there's no other way out, to be a successful entrepreneurs. And so but you do need to actually think through this process, right? But sometimes I think once you invest in it, and your family will support you, right? So because they know this part of your passion, right? And so it is very important to let them know that's what you want, right? And I think the most important thing is that you need to make yourself happy. I think that's the hardest part, is that being entrepreneurship, and it's a very lonely business, and most of the time you need to make all the tough decisions, and you have a lot of like moments that you just have no way to consult. And so I think that I read this book like by the Snowflake CEO, and he was saying that in the early stage startup company, the CEO just like walk in the foggy forest. And it's very true. And you need to get used to uncertainty. You need to actually be able to make the best decision based on very, very poor information. And you need to constantly make the choice, make the trade-off, right? And I think the balance is, if you think the balance is about, how to make this company successful, and so you will do whatever it takes, right? And that's basically, part of the commitment. So I would say, like, have been lucky to get a lot of strong support from my husband. And so it is a lot of like time commitment from your spouse as well, because when you cannot do the your duty as a mother, then father has to step in, right? So so that's but that's for everybody, right? I mean, like, whether it's male or female, we all need to get support from family. Yeah.
And, I think I did mention taking care of yourself, just as you did, Helen. Just like they tell you on the airplane, put your oxygen mask on first, and then you can help others. Because if your oxygen mask is not on and you're laid out, you're no good to anybody. So you do have to take care of yourself. And as Helen said, I do agree with prioritizing, but understand your priorities are going to change. And they may change on a daily basis, because that's what you have to do when you're being pulled from all different ends, and you have a significant commitment that you've made to your business and to others who are counting on you. But, you just have to prioritize. And again, they may change, day to day, month to month, year to year.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to ask one final question and then we will open it up to panelists. We have a few questions that have already come in, so excited to dive into those. So my last question is, the title of this webinar was sort of combating disparities for female founders and those of us in the entrepreneurial space. One of the things that we can do is obviously bring more awareness to the issue, right? We had this webinar today. We've been talking about it. This is not a new topic. There are lots of webinars and articles and things out there written about this. But what systemic changes do you think need to take place to really bring more parity to the table for everybody? And so this is not maybe necessarily something that you can do, but broadly, what do you think needs to take place? And then specifically for those of us that are tuning in, maybe what tangible actions can the rest of us do to really help, move us along that spectrum a little bit more?
So I think we have a lot of things to do, right? So I think, first of all, each of us actually has a responsibility to speak out on the issue, right? I mean, it is not a secret. Basically, everybody sees that, but if we don't actually fight for it, no one fight for us, right? And I think this is very important, like for all women to be aware of the challenges, and let's talk about it, and let's actually spread awareness and get support to each other, right? And I think I have been actually so just getting from my own experience, right? So not only the entrepreneurs, right? I graduated from computer science department, and computer science is well known, like very few women there. And I actually picked a female PhD advisor, right? So I myself I learned a lot from my advisor, right? I look up to her, and I learned how to actually be a successful female scientist from her. And then basically when I joined NC State, so our department has less than 3 or 5 female faculties out of 43 faculties. And in my class, I teach operating system class, and that's a core course for computer science. And in my class, I have 40 students. I have 1 female student. So that's how horrible the situation is. And so that was about 10 years ago. So I actually feel pretty bad about it, because this is very awkward situation for for both teacher and the students, right? And so in this case, it's for both investors and founders. So what we did is that I've been actively promoting women by serving as faculty advisor for our department, and I have been actually attending a lot of seminars and organizing last year we're organizing a women executive webinars also for our department. And so this is not only the founders, but also executives, right? So if you do statistics, how many women executives, right? How many female CEOs, very low percentage, right? And so, so 10 years later, I would say our department did very well, right? So I would like to give the numbers. Now our department has 23 female faculties. So NC State Computer Science Department becomes the highest concentration of female faculty in the whole country. So we are very proud of this fact. And I would say is that, we intentionally actually build this community. And I think we have very strong support. Our department also has the first female department head in the past few years. So this all helps, right? Because this is about the perception. This is about how people actually aware, okay, you need a support to each other. And I think for the investment, for the entrepreneurship world, it's the same thing, right? So we need to speak out. We need to help each other. I think things will change if we as a group fight for it. I think this is not something that is natural. I firmly believe female has actually a lot of advantage to start a company, we have a lot of have a lot of aspects. I think female are more kind of like focus on, you know, customer, right? Focus on user, focus on human. And so this is basically all the advantage we have, right? Being a successful startup company, it's not just about, okay, raising a bunch of money and burn a bunch of money and, you know, and then doing nothing, right? So it's really, at the end, any successful company has to actually bring value to the real user. So that's, I think, you know, we can do it, right? So, and there's no fundamental barrier for us to try it. And so, you know, the more we try, the more of us will try it, and the more success story we can build, and then I think the things will become better and better. Yeah.
Shawna?
Well, I'll share with you all. When I was in high school, considering colleges, many like decades ago, the then guidance counselor suggested that I find a college where I could find a good husband. So I went home and I told my parents. Let's just say the next day I had a new guidance counselor. So, you know, again, let's encourage women to, you know, to find their passion, to expose them to areas such as computer science. I mean, there's a whole world out there that we can expose girls to, and that we can support women in their endeavors to be entrepreneurs. Those are things that we need to do. I think, quite frankly, I think we need diverse representation in our judicial system. I think that will help. I think that will help with how we interpret laws that affect diversity and diverse candidates. I think it will help the judiciary. It will help the legislature. It will help everyone by showing that there are different perspectives that need to be taken into consideration in every facet of everything we do. And we as individuals, as Helen said, acknowledge that there's a problem and try to do what we can to solve the problem. So that's what I think we should try to do.
Great. All right. Well, we have, as I said, a couple of questions that have come in from the audience. So I will start with the first one. Deanna wants to know, how can we also break the race and cultural barriers in addition to, you know, gender?
Well, I will start us off, and Helen, you can add to that. So as you know, there's affinity bias where, you know, people like us. Well, once we need to start making people like us be more diverse people. So that way you see someone who of the same culture, of the same race. And so that affinity bias is no more, because we are all kind of unifying and we're seeing the similarities amongst each other and not the differences. And we're not being concerned or afraid because someone's different. And so I think the more that you put yourself out there, again, you know, not be shy, introduce yourself. Because I can tell you, for me, for personal experience, when I first started out talking about this networking, I would go to events and I would just kind of stand back and hope that someone would introduce me so that I could interject into the conversation. But then I realized, you know what, that wasn't happening. And I would go to these events, I would be there for hours, not talk to anybody. So I've wasted a bunch of time that I could have been at home doing something I wanted to do. So I changed that. And I would interject myself in a conversation. And so that way, people got to know me, and they saw me as this African-American female who had something in common with them, who had some different perspectives that weren't scary or frightening, but something that we could connect on. So I think that is a way to break down these barriers. But again, not to put everything on us, but again, there are things that we can do. And I think that's something we can do, is put ourselves out there. And again, don't be afraid to do it, because we have so much to offer. We just need to let people see that.
Helen, do you have anything you want to add? Yeah, I think basically we, as myself, right? So I didn't grow up in the United States. And so that's, first of all, have a culture barrier, and as well as language barrier. English is not my native language. And also coming from Asia, that's a kind of the minority in the startup world. So there's a lot of people like, I think it's a trust issue, right? So people tend to trust people who are actually more similar to yourself. It is, it's just like, it's a reality. Now the question is that I think, how do you get over the first impression, right? So again, don't be afraid to actually sell yourself, right? And it is very important, right? In the business world, it's all about the selling, right? So, and how do you emphasize the strong points you have, right? And then basically let people realize, okay, also, entrepreneurs, it's not a one person endeavor, it's actually a teamwork. So team is always very important. And when the VC look at your company, they make a decision whether they want to invest, they look at your team. So for me, I'm very intentionally to actually make our company very diversified. So we make all the endeavors to, hire the most, diversified talents. And that doesn't mean like, we say we hired this just purely for diversity. It's really because, when you have the team that are diversified, and you will aggregate people with different opinions, right? So at that time, the diversity is really very powerful, because you will hear like different perspectives. You will hear have people who actually contribute to different aspects in your journey. So as long as you build this diversified team and you have people to help you, I think that will make a lot of investors will buy in you, right? So they will not think you will hire people only look like you, right? That's very important thing. As a founder, you need to be very cautious on that. And I have to be honest, like with a lot of companies, like a lot of founders, they are now doing that, right? So, you guys probably heard of some stories like Uber CEO, right? So those, when you actually have the problems, eventually it will become a company culture disaster. So I think, in that sense, I think basically you just need to be aware of the challenges, but, just trying to present yourself, right, in the most positive way. So there's things you can achieve. Yeah.
Great. We have one question that's quite specific. So let me read sort of the description and then get to the question. They said, hi, we are developing tech based on our business needs that we recognize as having applications to multiple industries. So the business is pre-construction. They provide digital solutions for commercial subcontractors. They've created a system that educates, automates, and evaluates human labor. And their focus is maximizing human capital at a time when it's been difficult to fill positions. So the question specifically is, where would you recommend that they go to begin networking within the tech space?
So by tech space, is that like you want to find some technology people to help you to build the product?
So Rachel, I don't know if you're able to type a response to that. She said that they currently have it in development.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think, you can go to, like, if you are at UNC, right? So if you want to build this, you can go to computer science department and to, find some faculty. You can look at their research. And so the problem sounds like a more kind of optimization problem to me. So you can find some professors who are actually doing research in this area. And you can actually ask them to have some, maybe like they point to someone who actually did the research in this space. and point you to some research work, and you can read the research papers, and from there you can find who wrote that papers, and you can start to build that. The other thing is that you can go to related trade shows. So in the industry, there's a lot of trade shows, and for different kind of like a sector space, you can go to trade shows to networking. Yeah.
Shawna, do you have anything you would add?
So again, not quite sure of what exactly it is they're looking for, but I would start kind of working my way backwards. So who is the who's going to be the consumer, and then work my way back to find out where the product would be integrated. So I don't know if there's like a distributor type relationship, whoever's involved in helping ultimately put that product on the market. I would try to find out what kinds of organizations they're involved in and go from there.
Great. Okay. The next question, what are some of the things that you have learned along your entrepreneurship journey that help you make better decisions?
So is the question like trying to say what we learned, and maybe if we reflect what we could have done better?
I think it's actually more, and Carol, feel free to chime in if I'm misstating your question, but it sounds a little bit like, what helps you make good decisions? What have you learned over the course of the years through the entrepreneurial journey that now when you make decisions, you kind of draw from that experience?
Okay. So for me, a lot of I think the most important thing as a founder of the company is hiring, and and your go-to-market strategy, right? So this is two things that's most important. And so had lots of failures in hiring, and I think this is basically I think number one challenges when you start a company. You need to hire the right people. And so so I think the mistakes I made is that a lot of times we didn't actually so it is sometimes it's art, not actually a science, right? So you just like you need to find the right people to work with you. Like the interview is basically something you can learn by talking to a lot of people. You start to actually calibrate and know what kind of talent you can get, and what's their strengths and weakness, right? So this is I think the most difficult and most important thing to do as the founder. The second thing is go-to-market strategy. So that's actually interesting things like kind of learned is that one of things like a lot of times they are saying like fail fast, right? So that's a most important thing for startup company is that especially in a tech company, and you need to have this quick like iterations to try different strategies or ideas, and then and quickly fail, right? So it's the problem is that most of the time the different strategies will fail. So what you do is that you just try and then quickly adjust from there, right? That's how you win, beat the big company, right? Because like you think about the same strategy, right? So like IBM, they want to do this, and they probably take a if they decide that this is wrong path, they won't be able to actually make a decision tomorrow, say, nope, we don't do this, let's do this. They won't be able to do that, right? They will lay out a strategy for like 5 years, 10 years, and it's going to be a lot harder for those big companies to make changes. And so for startup, the really the secret weapon is the being nimble and agile, right? So that's the most important thing that as the founder, you need to actually quickly adjust it and make a action on that.
Actually, I echo that. So my response is going to be plan B. So don't be afraid of plan B. Also understand that there's more than one way to get to where you want to go. And if you have to take the scenic route, so be it, but just be nimble. But again, I really do believe in the plan B. Now I don't set out to go, start with plan B, but I realize that there may need to be one. And if there needs to be one, I implement it quickly, and I move on to plan B. And I don't, I learn, from mistakes with plan A, but I don't spend a lot of time lamenting plan A, because I need to focus on plan B to get moving along, keep along my path.
Great. Well, we are at time, maybe even a minute over. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Shawna and Helen for joining me today and having this conversation. As I said, and as you both pointed out, we need to bring more awareness to these issues, to talk about it, not be afraid to speak up and stand up for what we are passionate about. So I really appreciate you being here and speaking about both of your organizations and about what we can do to help each other. And just greatly appreciate your insights and your thoughts. For the rest of you, this series actually sort of concludes for this academic year. So we look forward to resuming our innovation speaker series in the fall and hope that you will stay tuned for some great lineups and some great speakers that we have then. Thank you all very much, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.